So I'm going to switch up the pace a little bit and zoom back out to high level overarching project objectives and user perspectives. This is a presentation that encompasses work from a whole bunch of people. So Alessandra is here, Bertrand, Timothy, Danny, Kate, Helen, and also Tatiana and Alex. I don't know where people are in the room. So I take no credit for the majority of things that we've done, but I will present them as if they are mine. So decision support, one of the key objectives of the two projects that we're on, so AdTrees and also Net Zero Plus, is to work with our potential users and project partners to deliver decision support. And the idea here is that we actually help to make real impact and influence the decisions being made by large landowners and by government. So in developing decision support, we were aiming to come up with a way of creating bespoke tools for these users that allow real-time decision support so that someone can sit down, think about a problem, play with the tool, get some useful information, and use that information in making their final decisions. We're looking at spatially and temporally explicit models, which is obvious given everything that we've seen in terms of the modeling elsewhere. But being able to put that into a tool and have it run in real time is a challenge. And we need the technologies of AdTrees to be able to create tools that run quickly. What we've done within the project so far is to create prototypes and to work with the users to come up with ideas, to test them, to co-design them and revise them. And this includes running things forward, so doing scenarios of what happens if I do something here, but also using the AdTrees technologies to look at inversion, thinking about if I have specific targets that I need to meet, if I have specific objectives that I want to look at, how can I achieve those? And how can I look at achieving multiple targets? And if there are a variety of ways of doing that, how do I organize the information about the potential different planting strategies, for example, so that a user can look at them and see how they're different and navigate across those and think about, okay, well, what do I prefer? So developing prototypes, but also allowing for the integration of improved models, right? The best scientific models that we have at any given point. Who are the users? Well, there are loads of users involved in both of these projects, and the little orange boxes here represent users that have been specifically involved in sort of one-on-one bespoke tool design and have been allowing us to work closely with them. And I'm going to talk more about what that's involved in this talk. Our original timelines, this slide is different to what I'm expecting. Okay. So just to think about what we thought the timeline would look like versus what it's looking like in reality. So we started out in May, 2022, January to May. We had some secondments. We started working with the users, thinking about what they needed from us. And the idea was to work through so that by the time we got to now, which is down here, we'd done the integration of all the models and we were working more on how we get the decision support systems into organizations, and we revised the way that these tools work and we link in with their existing access to tools, data sets, so that they can really get going on the ground with these. We're kind of somewhere there, but we're getting to a point now where it's difficult because the user engagement has been going on and we've done a lot of working on the functionality and the prototypes, but we really need the best scientific models to be updated within those prototypes so that we can move on and show users things where they can actually start looking at outputs that make sense, rather than outputs where we speak to them and say, now, this is how it will look, but please remember that the models I'm showing you are not the final models, and in some cases are completely imaginary models to represent what might go here. Okay. So how have these co-design methods worked? So you've seen a lot of really cool talks already on more of the mathematical side, on the computer science side, and I'm going to be talking about things that feel a bit fluffy. So co-design has involved a whole bunch of social science methods as well as computer science and sort of text analysis methods. Tatiana in particular has been looking at working with our users to think about the public-facing documents that they have, thinking about what they say their objectives are and how those have been evolving over time, and how we can use that to garner information about how they might use decision support tools and what kind of language they might use and how their decision processes are working. We've also been sitting in on meetings, so we've been invited to be involved in sort of strategic and operational meetings with our partners to see how those decisions actually get made, what the hierarchies are for decision making, where tools come in, which people make the decisions, and how that's going to affect whether anything that we make gets used. Right? So we can make a really nice tool. If we don't design it to fit within these decision-making structures, that won't count for anything. So this whole co-design process is about trying to get the user to work with us, embed them in the development, and make sure that the tools fit with the other things that they're using, and that decisions can actually be changed by using the information. So this included fuzzy cognitive methods. So this was Alessandro working with us as well, talking to literally hundreds of people within organizations. So Forestry England have been the sort of most enthusiastic partners so far, and they've given us access to hundreds of their people and many, many hours of their time working with us to think about the devolved decision-making structure within that organization. So they have a strategic approach where they have sort of national level objectives, but they also have a devolved district level decision system. Right? And understanding how those dynamics work influences the way that we design tools and the likelihood that anything we suggest to them will get implemented. And I'm going to show you some examples of why that matters later. So we use these fuzzy cognitive mapping sessions to think about mapping out what decisions were being made, what priorities existed at different levels within the organization, what constraints we need to take into account in tools so that the tools are relevant. And we have a whole series of analysis on this. So this is one way in which we're informing the development of the tools. We also have user advisory groups, which incorporate more of those partners, so not just the ones in the orange boxes. Okay, so here are some pictures. These are some of the online workshops that we ran with Forestry England. You can see us here. And the idea being that we want to bring the best scientific evidence, plus all the information from the users on their priorities, the decisions they want to make, the constraints that they have, including the text analysis, not just what they say to us, but what we see in other documentation, to develop bespoke decision support tools. And here is a picture from our digital twin generator, or elicitor. Still haven't got a good solid name for what it means, but it's the order form. It's where the user can come along and assemble their bespoke tool. And here are some, representations of what Forestry England think they would like from a tool at the end. So they're thinking about sliders. They've got a little bit of a thing about numbers in terms of internal communication. So this is one of the nuances that we have to be aware of, where we tend to think scientifically about numbers being quite good. You can hold on to it, you know what a number is. When communicating with each other, they don't want numbers. Right? Districts like to compare what their relative priorities are with each other, not what the absolute numbers are going to be, because that causes fights between districts. And so thinking about the way that we represent what we have when we see a number becomes important for helping the conversations and the deliberation within the organization to work. Okay, so what decisions are we thinking about making? Well, at the strategic level, decision support can be used for allocating budgets, for regional prioritizations. It can be used in reporting, so the natural capital accounts, for example, might be one idea of where these might go. But there's also the operational level. So if you think about National Trust and Forestry England, they have this devolved structure. So they have the organization as a whole, then they have the districts, which look at specific regions, and those districts have their own budgets. They also have their own teams of planners, ecologists, recreation teams, estates teams, all with their own priorities and their own decisions, which can influence where things get done. So at the operational level, we're looking at business cases, investments, management, including the removal of sites, removal of trees, forest plans, and recruitment. And then a third dimension to the decisions is the policy side. So policymakers like DEFRA don't do this by directly allocating land or management, but they think about payment mechanisms. They think about policy development. So here we might be thinking about decisions around the payment mechanism, the payment rates, budgets, eligibility of different, say, farmers or landholders to be in a scheme. So this helps us to think about what levers we need within the decision support tools for different users to be able to tweak before they see any outcomes. And here's some pictures of the tools that we've come up with and where these fit. So our bespoke decision support tool builder allows you to create an order form and assemble the decision support tool to meet these needs. At the minute, we've got this down for landowners, but we haven't done this for policymakers yet. Then here are some examples of our fast track landowner tool. So when we had it at a kilometre level and down to parcel level, which Dan showed you. And this was the original fast track policymaker tool, so working with DEFRA. What am I doing for time?
We've got 10 minutes in. We've got about 15
That's
to
not right.
go if you need it.
Okay, so I'm going to take you through some of the feedback that we've had from users and some of the challenges that we have still to face. So on our bespoke tool builder, you come in and you can work through steps. So you zoom to the area that you want to choose. You can select on the parcel level. You can put things in and out. You can group them. Then you can move along and say what outcomes you're interested in, and you can set targets on this. So Danny showed you a video. I didn't put it in here. I'm just going to talk you through how it works. So at the minute, users quite like this. We've tested it out with mostly landowners and our user advisory group. But there are definitely things that we need to do. And we've been quite ambitious in the way that we've set up dictionaries in here. So Net Zero Plus and Add Trees are thinking about trees, right? We're thinking about planting strategies. But users aren't only interested in trees, and they're not only interested in carbon. So we know this, the plus in Net Zero Plus is about the additional ecosystem services. But there are other things that they want to think about doing with their land that aren't trees that might take precedence. So expanding the options to include things like wet woodlands, like woods in water, woodland improvements, wetlands, livestock density changes, and energy options are quite high on their priorities list. And so we have those options built in there as straw men, if you like, things that they can look at as a long-term objective, but not things that we can actually do. So this, for me, is one big thing. Thinking about, it's not a decision about whether you put trees there or not. It's about what are the different things I could do with this land. Are trees the best thing? We've got the RSEs coming in later in this year. We're probably going to do some easy shortcuts and functionality adjustments. Users would quite like us to make it a bit easier for them in some cases. So we worked with them saying, what options do you need? But there's a lot of investment in learning how to use a tool like this and how to get to grips with it. And different users within an organization will have different capacities for using GIS-based tools. So for some, you might have an organizational option that says, I work for X and I'm in Y, and our standard is this default, and you could check that in and it'd give you some reduced set of inputs. So shortcuts. I'm going to start here, ethics start to creep in already. As soon as we're making decisions on the behalf of the user, we've got to start thinking about the ethical side, right? If we're choosing what's in these shortcuts, how are we influencing the outcomes that they see within a tool? Okay, so I'm going to hint at this is going to come up several times. Okay, and then there's some smart things. So being able to filter potential activities by land classes so that we rule anything out that would be impossible or stupid. Ruling out biodiversity that you could never have as being a metric that you would output in a tool, and capturing selections of information. So recording for transparency what a user has selected so that they can justify it to someone else later. Again, this feeds into the ethical side, being able to show the chain of decisions you made in setting up your tool and how it affects the recommendations is good practice. Okay. Another thing that we need to work on from a user perspective is integration. So integration with tools that are already accessible and data layers that are already accessible that we don't have access to necessarily within the project. So things like DEX, this is an MOD series of GIS layers. Right? If we want our users to actually take up these tools, we need to make sure that they build on what they already have, right? That they can use them alongside and that we get seamless integration. The easier it is to get the outputs from our bespoke tool to link up with the other things, so Forester Web, for example, in Forestry England, the easier it's going to be to try and change decisions and improve them with what we've got. Okay, I'm going to talk now just about the different tabs that we've got in our prototype tool. So Danny talked about there being 3 pages, if you like. Page 1 is we've got a user who's come out and they've developed their own tool. Right? They've selected a bunch of inputs, and the screen is tiny so you can't see, but we've got carbon, we've got a bunch of biodiversity options, we've got the area that's planted, and then we've got recreational visits. Right? So these are what we refer to as targets, things that the user is interested in. Then we've got the area here, and blue parcels where they're highlighted is a suggested planting strategy. So the user at the minute can come in, they can see a little summary of the estimated outcomes, if you like, from this planting strategy with some uncertainty because we're emulating, and also there's model uncertainty. So there'll be some likelihood of reaching these. Okay, and at the minute, the first page where they land in a support tool is showing them a strategy. But what should we show them as the first thing that they see, right? This is the first question. They can move the sliders. Should we show them something that's close to the sliders? So these sliders, they can move around. And it's really tiny. Danny talked before about identifying the set of strategies. So we're thinking about a set of strategies that are target compatible, like with some minimum probability of meeting the targets they've selected. So here we're seeing targets as being where the sliders are. Some of these you're going to want to exceed and not be below. Others you'll want to be below, right? So area, you don't want to exceed a certain amount. Biodiversity, you don't want to go below a certain amount. So at the minute, Timothy's been working on this front page and thinking about what was shown. And the default has been to be giving an equal weighting in terms of distance for each of these metrics, okay? So we're looking for one strategy in the set of strategies that is as close as possible to the points on the sliders. Yeah, make sense? Okay, so we can do that, but it's kind of arbitrary because when you choose what the sliders are, if I add in another measure, another bird, for example, I'm going to split that weighting again, right? I'm going to give now a lower weighting to each individual thing, and that bird's going to become equally important to carbon. That might not be how a user thinks about it, right? They might want to add in the bird, but really it's not as important as carbon. So this idea that we need to weight by user preferences might shape the way in which we choose the strategy they see first. Sometimes it's like, you're wrong. Okay, so we have a default in here, which is to give equal weighting to targets, but then that has this horrible effect of the more targets you put in, the weirder that measure becomes, and the less relevant to a user it might be. So an alternative might be for us to think about weighting this. What else do we need to think about? Well, here's the secret bit. At the minute, we've got carbon here, and we're showing users carbon that comes from the Joule estimates. Great. We've got biodiversity in here that's coming from some JNCC models, but it's not using the same climate as the carbon that we've got in there. And so really, I don't want any user to look at this and think anything about the biodiversity. Then we've got area planted. Yep, that's based off the shapes. And a recreation model that Bertrand just invented, which is basically like a randomized set of numbers. So that recreation is completely fictional. So what I really need is some ecosystem service modules that come from a scientific basis rather than from a prototype world of this is what it could look like. We'd like them to be consistent with each other and have a climate basis that's consistent. We want to build on something that allows the user to think about climate pathways or uncertainty, because at the minute, I'm just showing one thing, right? I'm showing one set of planting for a potential climate. At the minute, this is plant or not plant. Some trees. I'd like to have more species. I'd like to have mixed planting. I'd like to be able to think about planting in different years and not just all at once. And I'd like some valuation. So everything on this slider is currently a quantity. There's no values. It's number of visits, probability of occurrence, and carbon. Okay. Time-wise, I might need to hurry up. So user priorities, I also just thought it'd be nice to throw these in. So every time we meet with users, we record our interactions. And when we run a workshop with them, we have them do sort of an interactive play with the tool, give us some feedback, think about what else you need, what's missing. And so here I've ranked based on frequency and importance as reported by the users, the things that they would like to see next. And nice for the following fund, multiple species is right at the top, and soil carbon closely behind. Okay. Tab 2, when a user is in the prototype, we show them 4 different plots. Right? And these 4 come from a random selection from the target compatible strategies. Now again, we're randomly selecting from the target compatible, but the target compatible strategies that we see in the tool at the minute come from a sampling regime. And that sampling regime is not necessarily random across all the possible things that would be target compatible, right? Because we don't know that full space. We have to explore it and we're not sure where things are. So if we just uniformly sample, we're going to hit some spaces that are not target compatible. We might hit some that are. We need some iteration. So Bertrand's been working on how you sample that space and how you, working with Alex as well, on how you look for rare events, right? Where are the clusterings of things that are target compatible and how do we make sure we don't miss things or misrepresent where there are some opportunities? Okay, other things. At the minute, we're showing them 4 potential planting strategies. You see some outcomes up here, but we're not showing them any of the inputs, right? We might want to show them how these vary by the planting date, right? So we're going to have a time dimension we need to think about. We might want to think about, is it just planting? Is it planting a specific species? Is it some other options? Okay. Now I mentioned before that preferences matter, and I'm going to show you again a prototype, a dummy. So here is the lizard, and I've just created some data. So we've got all the land parcels, and imagine that we have a landowner who's interested in planting some particular amount of wood, right, of new trees. So here is one potential planting strategy that takes that target, so the target approach where we just give an equal weighting. So I'm planting some amount and I give equal weighting. If I then take some preferences into account, right, so I'm just rescaling based on preferences for the different targets, you can see that the planting is going to shift. Okay, fine. Now, here are the ward splits, right? So here we have one ward in the bottom and we've got another ward here. Imagine that those wards are managed by people who have different preferences, right? So we've got the strategic high-level preferences. But once I allow the directors of these wards to be involved in the decision-making process, they're going to change where the money goes. So imagine that your national level budget allocator makes a decision about who's going to get the money for planting trees, right? And this is where they would like the trees to go. But the ward directors get to decide where the trees go once they get the budget, right? So the budget is the same, but because I've got the ability to decide where I plant within my ward, we move where we're planting. Okay? So understanding who makes the decisions at which stage influences where things are going to go. And we can build that into the way that we advise on, you know, how should you allocate your budget strategically? Where's it going to end up? Okay, so this brings us to the 3rd tab, thinking about incorporating user preferences. Now, those user preferences might be different at those different levels. Like different people within an organization might have different preferences. And one big risk is that the preferences that I put in to the tool, right, the things I tell you I care about, might influence what I see and what I show my boss and what I show my colleagues as being the outputs from the tool. And there's a risk here that we might accidentally design something that we can manipulate, right? So you end up going to this meeting saying, yeah, I use the decision support tool and these are the things, the ones where you plant right around my house. Those are the best ones. So we need to think about the transparency and how we accumulate those and being very clear about whose preferences are being represented in the tool. But also it's useful, right? It is useful for understanding how decisions will be made. And I think these things happen without decision support tools, right? The negotiations that go on about where things get put in, you know, deliberative participatory methods involve these kinds of preferences, just not transparently. So I don't think this is a game changer, but it's a useful thing to be aware of. When we're thinking about this preference solicitation as a process, users are going to be interacting with the tool in fairly short sessions. Okay? Now, we're not going to have a lot of opportunities to gain data in each session. 5 minutes? So we have a challenge that each session is short, and we have the opportunity to take limited pairwise comparisons. So as Ian was saying earlier, designing what you see in those stages is really important for maximizing the information that you can gain. But we also need to allow for learning to occur so that people can interact. This means it's really important that we have an intelligent way of picking the starting point, the first things that they see, and the prior over the preferences. But we can efficiently gather information. And one thing that's really cool is that you don't have to just do it here, right? If you've got a tool, you can actually see how users interact with the page, how often they move. And there are ways to gather information here that can inform the way that you design the navigation through an interface. Okay. Key feedback from users, just summarizing it. Here we can come back. I'm going to go into next steps so that we finish questions. Okay, so designing good sampling strategies so that we avoid bias is key, and I'm sure there'll be more talks about how we do that. This is one of Alex's pitches about looking for sampling where you get rare events occurring. So here's a more uniform spread, and then you're focusing down on where those rare events be. Thinking about how we allow users to navigate through the tool, what they see, how they choose the story is important, but it also has these potential ethical implications. We want to see how much we can garner from learning from the way that users interact with the tool. We need good preference elicitation, and we need to represent emergent themes, but keep the transparency about how we got there and what you're missing with the perspective. And I'll stop.